It seems like just a few days ago, it was in 1969, that I was walking out of the Richland County Courthouse in Columbia, South Carolina, with one of the most distinguished lawyers in the history of this state, Lincoln Jenkins, Jr. As we were descending the steps at the Richland County Courthouse, he called me dude for some reason. He said, "Dude, we had a meeting last night at the Masonic Temple, and we decided that we're going to run you for the legislature. And my qualifications," he says, "you are dumb enough to be a legislator." Because all of those people over there are dumb. The lesson I learned from that is that you never seek an office always seeks you. Back in 1969, there had never been a person of color elected to the South Carolina General Assembly. Many had attempted all across the state, in Richland County, in Charleston County, and in other communities, but none had been successful. But one thing they had done was to build a foundation, because each 2 years, we elected members of the House every 2 years and the senators every 4 years, and every 2 years an African American would strive to get elected to the House of Representatives. And each year their efforts constituted a building block. In 1969, in Charleston County, for example, two African Americans ran, Herbert Fielding and Jim Clyburn. In Richland County, two African Americans ran, Jim Felder, who is here today, the good-looking fellow that was raising his hands, and I ran. Interesting, Jim Felder won, Herbert Fielding won, and I.S. Levy Johnson won. Now it's 2013. Where is Jim Clyburn and where are the three of us? Jim Clyburn is in Congress and we're up here talking to y'all. But when we decided to run, my recollection, among many, the three things that stood out as impediments to us getting elected was, number one, this concept is that we cannot find any qualified blacks. That was what was thrown in our faces for years. We cannot find any qualified blacks. Well, when Jim and I ran, our credentials were superior or equal to most of the white elected officials. Matter of fact, at that time, I had 3 degrees, and there is a history behind that. On my mother's side, my roots are from Kershaw County. My granddaddy, I.S. Levy, I'm named after my grandfather, and my grandmother, Mary Kirkland Levy, are from Kershaw County. And my grandfather established a funeral business in 1932 in Columbia, South Carolina. And I had the good fortune of being raised by my parents and my grandparents, but primarily by my grandparents. And back in those days, and it's still common now, families lived in the funeral home. My grandfather was very active politically, but he also required us to work. And when I was a little boy in high school, my granddaddy made me sweep the floors, take out the trash, and wash the windows. And so when I was in high school, I decided I needed to do better. So my grandfather sent me to mortuary science school, where I got a associate in mortuary science degree. And when I finished mortuary science school at the University of Minnesota, I came back and I did the embalming, and my granddaddy made me sweep the floors, take out the trash, and wash windows. And I said, you know, something wrong with this man right now. So I decided to go to Benedict College to get a degree in business. And sure enough, my granddaddy moved me up to the front office. Then I was working in the front office, helping to manage the business, doing the embalming, sweeping floors, taking out the trash, and washing windows. And for some reason, I decided to go to law school, never intending to practice law. And I graduated from law school and got sworn in as a lawyer. And I can recall the day when I came back to the funeral home because I intended to remain with my grandfather work. He met me at that front door with a broom. So I could continue sweeping those floors, taking out the trash, and washing those windows. I want y'all to know today, I own Levy's Funeral Home. My name is on the deed. But I also want y'all to know I'm still sweeping those floors, taking out the trash, and washing those windows. And I tell you that story humorously because it's so significant in terms of what you have to do politically. Because my grandfather, as I said, was very active in politics. And what he did was to go persuade the election commissioner to allow people to bring those voting machines to our funeral home. And my grandfather had a radio program every Sunday, and he would invite people to the funeral home so they could practice on those machines. And so another impediment back in those days to our getting elected was they had full slate voting. What that meant, as in Richland County, if you had 10 vacancies, in order for your vote to count, you had to vote for 10 candidates. So when someone went to the polls to vote for Jim Felder and me, they would vote for the two of us, but at the same time, they would vote for 8 of our opponents. And how it worked was that in the black community, the blacks would vote for blacks, but in the white community, the whites would not vote for the blacks. And so they would win the elections. In 1970, when we got elected, we ran as a team. Fortunately, there were some persons of goodwill who were on the delegation and in the community who actively supported us and helped us to get elected. I cannot tell you any stories today that when we were elected and we were received in the House of Representatives, that we encountered any overt racism. Obviously, there was covert racism. Just like in those days, I've told you about this full slate voting was an impediment to effective participation of all races. The same thing is taking place today. There are widespread efforts to pass election laws that suppress the participation of all people in the electoral process. That is as true today as it was when Jim Felder and I have gotten elected. I know there are a lot of opinions of what is causing the shutdown, for example, in Washington, D.C. I submit the root cause of what is causing it is reapportionment. What has happened in these states is, as a result of reapportionment, you have segregated districts. And many of the districts, the elected officials do not feel a commitment or an obligation to the constituency. And in many instances, we as African Americans have contributed to the problem because we were so concerned about drawing safe districts. You don't need safe districts. What you need is influence districts, districts where you have a constituency composed of a diverse voting group to influence. In many of the districts now, especially in Republican districts, that these elected officials feel that they owe nothing to people of color. And as a result, in Washington, you find that people are taking positions because they feel they're safe based on their constituency back home. And every elected official, I don't care what they say, they're always interested in re-election. Here in South Carolina, we still have racial polarization. Here in South Carolina, we still have efforts to suppress the liberty of voting. Here in South Carolina, we still have inferior schools, inferior school systems. There is a substantial amount of children dropping out of school and teachers dropping out of school. Too many of our children, especially African American children, for example, are being expelled from school. When you expel a child from school, that means that child is not getting adequate teaching and training. There should be a system and there should be means by which those children who have infractions in school are still retained in a learning environment. We are very fortunate here in South Carolina in the sense that we have a dynamic, a progressive, and a relevant South Carolina Legislative Black Caucus. I remember when we formed the Black Caucus, some of the criticism was that, why y'all need a Black caucus? I say, because y'all got a white caucus. They said, no, we don't. I said, you always had a white caucus, and you will always have a white caucus. Don't try to fool me. And so the Black Caucus in South Carolina, and you will hear from some of the leaders today, they are very powerful, they're very influential, and they do a good job for the people, for all the people of South Carolina. We welcome you here to South Carolina. We trust that you'll have a wonderful visit, that it will be very educational. I apologize, I'm going to have to leave. I must attend a funeral. I was interested in noting the attire of the former governor. He has on jeans, and I got on a black suit.